conduct the robotic surgery? What happens to the life of the human? That is a major problem. So we got to ensure the grid is not compromised. Okay. Now, here is some of the attacks I want to show you. The smart grids attacks can be as simple as data manipulation. Yes, it is not detrimental. It could be attacking the systems to steal a lot of data. That itself is bad, but to shut down a complete system, it is certainly possible. Okay, there could be different types of attacks. False data injection, persistent threats, right? So there is all kinds of attacks happening, causing not only power outages, causing economic losses and damages to physical infrastructure. And one cannot have that. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you, here are just a few examples of attacks on smart grids. So false data injection, like all it talks about is creating a congestion on the transmission lines. You load the data, extensive data on the transmission lines, and you overload it and the power is not transmitted, right? Or you inject false data and route the power elsewhere from one location to the other and compromising the service you provide. Or, for example, man-in-the-middle attack. So supervised control and data acquisition system. So if there is a data acquisition system, if you can control it, you can change the power delivered from one location to the other. And you can even stop the power, right? And you can steal the data on where the power is transmitted. And potentially, let's say hypothetically, there is a power being generated and also a significant amount of power used in some sector in the country, and there is a top secret facility. And the opposing country steals this data, they could use this information for creating a cyber attacks on your secret facility. That is a problem. There is a huge kind of attacks there here. So one has to keep in mind about all these attacks when it comes to smart grids. Okay. Now, where do EVs come into place? So electrical vehicles are a buzzword these days, and everybody is trying to get into electrical vehicles. Why? Is it because it is low cost? Is it because energy is sustainable? Is because it is a cool factor? Why? I'll talk about why in a second, but now the point.
Actually,
Oh my God.
what we thought is you are just
Oh my God.
explaining.
No, I'm moving on. Like I'm already 15 slides in. Oh my God.
We are just
Okay, let
hearing
me
your
see something.
explanation, but unable to see the movement in the slides.
Oh, 1 second. Huh. Okay, let me try one other thing here. Now, can you see this better, man?
Yes, sir.
So you're able to see all these now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Movement.
Movement.
Yes,
Yes,
sir,
sir.
it's moving now, but you just please go for slideshow.
That's what I did before.
But it's not moving.
Okay, let's do it this way. Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why, but let's do it this way. I mean, as long as you can see the slides here, I will go slide by slide and we can talk. So let me try the slideshow once and see how it works. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, sir, that particular slide is visible, but
But it is
not
not
as a
moving.
slideshow. But not as a slideshow.
I'm doing it as a slideshow, but okay. Let's stay with this one because I'm trying to present as a slideshow and it is not going through. So I will share my window and you can see the slides hopefully this way. You're able to see the slides, right? I mean, hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, now it's moving, sir.
Okay, let's go with this. Let's go with this. I mean, I'm trying to maximize the screen whatever I can. Oh, no. Yeah, let's go with this. And I will try to see the two screens at the same time to ensure you're seeing this. Okay, so okay. So the point I'm trying to say, okay, let me go back here quickly. Here is a few examples of the smart grid I was talking about. The picture on the left, on the purple, is the grid of yesterday, and the one on the right, in the green, is the smart grid that is working today and tomorrow. And here are the taxonomy of the different types of attacks, cyber attacks on the smart grid, is what I was trying to talk about. Now, so coming back to electrical vehicles, so we're talking about EVs are the new buzzword. I mean, the new way of transportation. And now it creates an opportunity, but also a threat to the grid, because the amount of energy utilized in an electrical vehicle for transportation far exceeds the capability and the capacity of the grids nowadays. And also, the grids, if you think about it, the grids are all static. They go for, yeah, the power is being distributed, but the grids are located in finite areas. But when you're talking about electrical vehicles, you power them up and you are mobile. And power's necessity is also changing. So one could start driving from an urban area, going to a rural area, and you need to charge your vehicle there again to come back, which means you need high power in the rural areas. So that is causing a shift in the demand of the power. So let me talk about this here briefly. Here I have two slides. I just want to show you quickly. Is the one on the left talks about the market share of electrical vehicles in each country, right? So now if you see overall, about roughly across all the countries, right? Across all the countries right now, there is already 40 million EVs in operation right now. And what I want you to just look into it is like, it is growing exponentially, number one. Number two, the difference or the growth between 22 and 23 is just astronomically 35%. And that is increasing by the day. That number is increasing by the day, 35%. And if we grow again by 35% from 40 million, that is going to be 60 million. And if the growth continues, which it is projected to continue, it is going to be a significant challenge for engineers. But now, the graph on the right is what I want to show you. It's not all great. It is good, but not great. What I want to show you here is this is the greenhouse gas emissions from electrical vehicles compared to IC vehicles, internal combustion vehicles. So EV vehicles, yeah, we might say it is not emitting any gases, right? But where is the energy generated, right? There is some emissions there. The batteries that are utilized here, the lithium batteries, to manufacture those batteries, there is a lot of emissions happening as well. So electrical vehicles are not emission-free completely. There is some emissions, but as you see, 15 versus 22. There is almost a 50% difference of emissions between IC vehicles and electrical vehicles. So that this significant advantage is propelling and catalyzing the growth in EVs as well, is what I want to talk about. Now, what is happening? Here is something else also happening. There are key elements influencing global adoption. One, economical viability. The cost of EVs is coming down substantially. Governments are subsidizing it even more, right? But the flip side, the charging infrastructure, it is still lacking. So if I tell you, if you take an electrical vehicle and if you charge it at your home, and it would take on your regular power outlet, if I tell you if you plug it in, and if it takes about 14 hours overnight to charge for 100 miles, will it suffice? Maybe, maybe not. For a lot of people, it does not. So you need to have a high power delivery charging infrastructure. That's not there yet. That is a problem. So we need to think about how do you set up this charging infrastructure, right? And also policies. The government has to come in and set up different procedures. So how do you balance that? There are different aspects. So coming here, I'm going to move a little forward quickly because I know we have only a little time. So if you do this, if you balance the smart grid and also the vehicles and also the infrastructure, also the governance, all of this, right? So think about this for a second. If I do this, what it says is I can save up to 300 lives each year in a city of 5 million. So in a place like, let's say, for example, a city like Chennai, going towards an ecosystem, a smart ecosystem, I can save 300 people from dying. That is a substantial increase. I mean, even if you save one life, that is something. But saving 300 people, that is something else. Now, you're decreasing the crime rate by 40%, right? Crime rate going down by 40%, increasing the living style, the livability of humans. So like that, there are many, many advantages when you do the smart ecosystem. So let's come back into the EV integration. So what are the challenges? So when you talk about the smart vehicles, there is the grid, there is the charging station, there is the vehicle, and this grid is dynamic in different locations. So there could be attacks targeting just the charging stations. So now think about it. What kind of an attack would it be? Let's say the charging station right now, the high power charging station, let's say is charging at 250 kilowatts per hour. Okay, and we know if everybody wants their vehicles to be charged very quickly, and they don't want to wait. So to address that, the power being delivered initially is at a very high speed, right? A very high amperage. You deliver high power at a high amperage, it charges the battery. And the way these systems are designed is that once the batteries are charged to a certain percentage, the amperage that is going through is throttled down to ensure safety. But if somebody gets into those charging stations and removes the throttle of reducing the amperage, and if you keep going at 250 kilowatts continuously, what could happen to the batteries? Once it crosses a certain capacity, it doesn't stop, the batteries could explode. Those are pretty harmful. And batteries, I don't know if anybody has seen a place where batteries have exploded. So, but battery explosion is serious. It's very serious. It's very harmful. So somebody could easily attack a charging station, right? Or one could go into the charging station, access all the data from a vehicle, and utilize the data for some other purposes. Or somebody could go into a vehicle. From the vehicle, they could access the grid, and from the grid, they could control the different operations of the grid. Or some could go into the grid and deny the service of electric power delivery to vehicles such as ambulances or different locations. There could be different challenges. So how do we do this? How do we manage this? So we need to provide a framework to address these challenges. So the NIST provides a framework to manage the cybersecurity. So what it says is, first, you got to identify. You got to come up with different core functions. You got to identify what are the different threats potential. What are the different attacks that is potential. Then you got to come up with a way to protect your system from all these threats, right? Once you put that in place, you got to identify, you got to come up with mechanisms to detect these threats very quickly. Yes, sir. Somebody raised their hand. Okay. Probably it might be an accident of sorts. Okay. So the point is, you got to come up with a framework that you can detect the threats, you can protect it, and you can respond. And sometimes the response is like probably cutting off the grid from the problem. But how do you recover? I mean, sometimes response and recovery takes months of time, which you cannot have some certain times. You got to come up with the mechanisms to recover quickly. So the rest is okay. Detection methods. I mean, there are many detection methods in cyber attacks, but the point is, these attacks, as I showed you earlier in the first few slides. Oh, I don't think you have seen that. Here is the slide I showed earlier. This talks about the average cyber attacks per week per industry. So as you see, the percentages talks about the percentage increase from year to year. The number of attacks is increasing, and the percentage of attacks is increasing in each industry, right? So we talked about this for a second. So when the types of attacks are increasing, one cannot look at the data and say, yes, there is an attack. To identify new attacks, new anomalies have to be detected. And people are using machine learning and deep learning models to detect all these, right? So machine learning models are significantly helpful here. And some of them use statistical analysis. Some of them use artificial intelligence. Some of them use combinations. So, but as we know, the machine learning models are only as good as the information we feed them. This requires one to constantly provide new updates, new data to our machine learning models to detect patterns. Okay. Now, here is an example I showed you. I just want to talk about this briefly for a second. Machine learning models. I mean, this is something we see all the time with our researchers here. Choosing the right estimator is critical in machine learning models. If you do not choose the right estimator, you could classify it completely wrong, because if you train it wrong, the information, the inferences that you get is also going to be wrong. So to train rightly, you got to have the right estimator. So here is an example, and here is a link I have. It's a scikit-learn. It's a great example that talks about how to choose the right estimator for different applications. And I strongly encourage you all to try this out when you get a chance. Now, in addition to the learning models, you got to select the right features, okay? And you got to ensure the right features are selected in order to detect the intrusion detections, right? And you also have to come up with ways to detect the attack, stop the attack, and recover from the attack very quickly. Okay, so if you select the right features correctly, you can quickly identify the false data injections and grid manipulations and prevent it. But if you do not do so, that is going to be a problem. So again, there is different mitigation methodologies. The simplest and the straightforward one is do not put the raw data on the grid. Encrypt the data, and ensure secure communication protocols are used continuously in every communication. By the way, electrical vehicles, the CAN bus that is used in vehicles internally, unfortunately, is one of the most unsecure systems. And encryption and security is lacking in the campus. So there is a lot of work necessary to secure the CAN bus and the data going into the electrical vehicles, right? That is something we got to keep in mind. And also, the next thing is network segmentation. Do we need to be connected to the network all the time? Or can we be isolated from the network at times? That is something you got to look into. So if you need the data to be transmitted from a network to your end station, great, connect it. But if you do not need it, think about ways to isolate it from the primary network, right? Other aspect is how do you build a resilient network? Okay, so a lot of times, if you detect an attack, it requires a human intervention. And human intervention at times takes a lot of time. But can you design a system? Can you design a control system in such a way that it detects the attack, detects the fault, and self-corrects without waiting for human intervention? That is something. But again, that is a fine line you got to figure out. Lastly, as I said earlier, you got to train the system with new data regularly to ensure the system is able to detect any known attacks that is happening. Okay, so there are standards. The nice thing is there are standards for it. You can follow. There is industry frameworks, IUC 62351 for power systems. The NIST comes up with numerous standards for that. Okay, so utilize the standards, industry standards out there. Now, I just want to talk about quickly a few examples. Here is a few examples, by the way, guys. This just a few examples of data that happen here, attacks that happen here. These, I just took a handful of them from one literature. So if you see, happened in the past 2 years. And you might look at the data, the first one, 2023. If you see, it's targeted multiple sectors, including defense, healthcare, and energy. And you might talk about extracting only 100 megabytes of data. But if you look into the core data, 100 megabytes is a lot of data. And you're talking about a continuous spying campaign. How harmful is it? That is something you got to think about it. Okay. So, for example, let me take the 2022 cyber attack, disrupted all terminal operations in Europe. Okay. It sabotaged energy companies' payment portals and hindered transportation of oil to different countries. What detrimental harm would it cause to the economy? What harm would it cause to the community? That is a big issue there. So there is the issues that are going to come up on the cyber attacks to the grid goes far beyond just the power. Okay? There is a lot of challenges with that. So keep that in mind. Now, I'm just going to wrap this up quickly soon. So we're talking about integrating EVs. So if you integrate EVs with the grid, so this is something, a unique advantage. It provides a unique advantage. Because if you remember, we talked about it briefly. In the smart grid, you transmit power from the power plants all the way to the end user. But what if the end user, which is the electrical vehicles with huge batteries, also serve as mobile chargers, mobile energy storage systems, right? So if you're connected to the grid, what if you deliver power to the vehicles and the power is being delivered during off-peak times? And if you transmit the power and store all the power in the vehicles and not worry about the demand on the grid, that would be helpful. That balance the load, right? So that is going to be helpful. But how do you ensure the right algorithms are in place? How do you ensure sufficient security measures are in place to operate efficiently? That is going to be a big challenge up front. Again, as I said, you got to use the right protocols, and two, you got to ensure the data is captured in real time and adjust the charging network accordingly. So there are other mechanisms to secure the system, which is blockchain is one. And blockchain can be used to ensure secure transactions, while at the same time, it can ensure that to a certain extent, the system is isolated from the major network. It can work in a decentralized manner. It can ensure that automation is provided of sorts, and it can ensure safety and privacy of EV transactions, which is a big aspect, right? Now, we got to think about self-healing mechanisms, as I was talking about earlier. You cannot just no longer say human intervention is necessary. You got to think about how can the system detect faults, isolate problems, and restore operations very quickly without causing a major disruption. So what are the trends going on in this area? One is AI, ML-driven data analytics, okay? And number two, security frameworks at different levels, anywhere from the edge device all the way to the cloud. There are multi-layered security frameworks, right? Then ensure that enhancing the capabilities of the grids. And lastly, also look into quantum computing to ensure, see if you can provide secure protocols. So lastly, most importantly, we got to bring in the government and regulatory commissions to ensure that the right policies and procedures are in place. But at the same time, the government is better informed so they can take actions that support the public but doesn't cause harm to the public, is something we got to look into. So these are a few examples of cities that we're talking about here. Singapore is a smart city already. It collects data through the network, through the grid, through the vehicles to reduce the congestion. Okay. Here is New York. Here is a big city that we know. You might chuckle at that, what they're using it for, but by simply looking at the trash that is generated by public in the vicinity, they're able to figure out optimal routes for their electrical vehicles and feed that information to the system, and that allowed quicker commutes, okay, and better utilization of resources, less pollution, cleaner environment, and also reduced crime. They're like that. There are many applications. If you ensure a safe grid and safe vehicle network, you can generate a smart city and collectively can increase the quality of life of a human. As I said, if you connect to the smart ecosystem, you can save up to 300 lives per person, per city of 5 million per year. even saving one life is worth the effort that we all put in. So with that, I will stop and see if you all have any questions. Hello, Dr. Vijay Kumar, you say raise your hand. Hello?
In just a minute, sir will come, sir.
Okay.